Is happening, everybody? Welcome in to an all-new Pack-A-Day podcast happy hour. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on X at Andy Herman NFL. Thank you so much for being here. We are on the precipice of Packers free agency and an NFL free agency. We'll see. I think somebody just messaged in or put in the comments. Maybe Bach News will break during this happy hour. I doubt it. I don't think we're going to see anything like that, but I was kind of expecting some Packers news today, and we just didn't get any. I joked on X basically saying, here I am thinking that we might get some Packers news today. And yet the Packers have still yet to announce their defensive coaching staff hires, their offensive coaching staff hires, their strength and conditioning staff hires. Like, they're still well behind the eight ball. So not that they're necessarily related, of course, but sometimes these things take time seemingly for the Packers. I'm expecting news, at some point from a Packers standpoint of, probably moving on from some players. Bakhtiari, Royce Newman, Devondre Campbell would seem to make sense, but that, we're still on sort of the edge of our seats, sort of waiting to see what is going to happen first. Then, of course, you get to free agency. Are there going to be any players that they bring back and re-sign prior to the start of free agency? So far, there have not been. Are there any other restructures that are going to get done? They've done a couple of those so far, but we know from Tom Silverstein a week ago that they're working on Aaron Jones. Are they going to get something done there? And then, of course, as we get to next week, are there going to be free agent signings? Are there going to be any trades? There is so much that is out there. It should be, regardless of what happens, a very hectic and crazy and fun next week. And we'll see if Green Bay gets started on that sooner rather than later, maybe this weekend, maybe early Monday. Who the heck knows? Like I said, the Packers sometimes drag their feet. And Goody basically said, right, I'm not going to do anything until I have to do something. And they kind of wait until that very last minute. I don't think it's a procrastination thing. I think it's setting themselves up to still give themselves options. For example, with Bakhtiari, maybe Bakhtiari and the agent have a change of heart and say, you know what, we do want to remain Packers and we are going to sign for less or whatever it might be. Sometimes those things happen. So I think Goody doesn't, sort of box himself into one specific corner and tries to give himself as many outs as possible. That's a really good trait for an NFL GM to have. Either way, should be a very fun next couple weeks. Omer, I see that you got in early and often with some of these chats this morning. So I'll get to a couple of yours first. You said your top two targets in free agency would be Xavier McKinney, age 24, although maybe more money, prefer him over Simmons, who is 30 years old. And I target Alexander Mattison, age 25. Wonder what you feel about Mattison at the same price as A.J. Dillon is value at by Spotrac, Andy. All right, let's start with Xavier McKinney. I'm on the same page as you on this one. Xavier McKinney is a stud. And as I mentioned on my Justin Simmons video today, the more I watch Justin Simmons, who's a good player, the more respect and appreciation I received for Xavier McKinney. I was just watching Simmons do some of the stuff from a center field standpoint and trying to get, from center field to sideline, and it was fine, but it was nowhere near what McKinney was capable of. It was nowhere near from a playmaking standpoint and center field standpoint what McKinney could do. And it just, again, it wasn't to tear down Justin Simmons. It was to say, holy cow, there is a big difference to what Xavier McKinney can do at that spot. He's a very fun player. He's not your all-time perfect safety that Jeff Hafley was laying out in his press conference of all the amazing traits. But man, he is the closest thing to it that is out there for the Packers to acquire either in free agency or the draft. He would be that piece on the back end of the defense that would keep everything together. Now, clearly you're going to have to pay an exorbitant cost to go get him. Would ultimately probably be pretty surprised if Green Bay went in that direction and decided to go get a big time safety and spend 14, 15 mil per year, whatever it might be for McKinney, but he's a heck of a player. I'm excited to see what they do at the safety market. They are going to acquire some pieces there, I would think, either a piece or two, maybe three, who knows, in free agency. But man, McKinney is a stud. He would be 1A on my list as well. As far as Alexander Mattison, I am out on Alexander Mattison. If you guys have heard me for any period of time now, I'm at the point where at the playmaking positions, I want playmakers. I don't want guys who can get what's blocked for them or, are just going to get the bare minimum and then they're not going to do a ton after point of contact. I want players who get the ball in their hands and are dynamic. I want running backs who are going to break tackles or make people miss in space. I want wide receivers who are going to break tackles or run away from defenders with pure unadulterated speed. I want tight ends that are going to run away from linebackers or safeties or be too big and physical for corners. I want mismatch pieces. I want playmaking. I want big plays. I want those things. I want Aaron Jones, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. I want those guys, but I want even their backups to the backs. Bo Melton has the potential to be a playmaker. I need that running back behind Aaron Jones to still have playmaking ability. I don't see that in Alexander Madison. I don't see that in AJ Dillon, and I want more of a playmaker. I've gone over on numerous occasions. Gibson for the Commanders is the player that I think would be a absolute perfect situation and scenario where you're not going to pay an exorbitant cost. It's not going to, really limit you from what you can do in the draft. It's not like, well, we got a free agent, so now we can't go out and get somebody in the draft. It doesn't limit you at all there. You can still go and pick whoever you want in the draft. And then, you still have the opportunity to now have a backup to Aaron Jones with Gibson that he can actually do some of that playmaking stuff. I thought the Commanders did such a terrible job of utilizing him through the course of his career. He's a playmaker with the ball in his hands. He can catch the ball. He can run. He can kick return. He can do a variety of different things. He's a better pass protector than he gets credit for. Overall, that to me would be the real player that I would be targeting if I were Green Bay as a running back, as that back end sort of value signing. Now, if he gets a big deal, in that case, you just go in a different direction. You probably look via the draft, but that's one player that I think could very much make sense for Green Bay. I'm going to get to some others. Omar, I know you sent a bunch in, but I do want to try to get to as many as possible. Of course, for anyone that's in the chat, any super chats will go to the top of the list and will get answered for sure. I should note as well, I do have a hard exit at 4:45 Central Time today. So not a full happy hour today, but we'll try to get to as much as I possibly can. All right, Wesley Sipes, great name. What is the top dollar do you think that the Packers should pay for Xavier McKinney? I was looking at this. I did see it before I came in a little bit. Marcus Williams last year for the Ravens, was similar age, I think similar playmaking ability. He got a 5-year, $70 million deal. That's $14 million per year. I think that's probably right around what you should be expecting for Xavier McKinney. Now the cap went up though. It's a year later. So you're probably looking at maybe $15 million. I think 5 years, 75 would be the absolute max that you would be looking at for somebody like McKinney. I think that's probably pretty exorbitant. I think that's probably a little bit out of Green Bay's range, but I wouldn't go any higher than that. 5 years, 75 should probably be the cap on that. Of course, there's if it's 5 years, 75 and, McKinney and his agent come back and say, hey, we want to be in Green Bay, but we need 5 years, 76. Well, okay, the extra million's not going to break you, but 5 years, 75 is probably what I'd be looking for as an absolute max for Xavier McKinney. Kevin, good question here. With the influx of free agent safeties in the market, do you think it's better to go get 2 C+, B- guy safeties instead of all in on McKinney and allocate more free agent money towards off-ball linebacker, slot corner, running back too? This is a really, really fun question. My overarching number one free agent rule, always go get a really good player rather than a conglomerate or amalgamation or whatever you want to say of smaller, littler, lesser known, whatever players. This is a league that is more often than not won or lost with playmakers, with big time players, guys who are going to impact the game consistently. I would rather have one big time player that you go out and spend that money on rather than a couple C+ players at a variety of different positions. The reason being is, especially with the Green Bay Packers and especially with Brian Gutekunst, they're adept at finding C+ players in a variety of different ways or better. They're finding Rasul Douglas's and Alan Lazard's off of practice squads. They're bringing in Devondre Campbell's and Rick Wagner's at near minimum deals right before the start of free agency. They're finding Bo Melton out of the Seahawks practice squad. They are adept at finding good, talented players, period. End of story. It's not difficult, but they are, again, really good at finding just good players, guys that can step in and play. What Green Bay needs more of is great players. So my rule 1A is if you're going shopping and you have $15 million to spend, I would much rather you go and get a big time player at $15 million than 3 guys at $5 million a piece. That's my general rule of thumb. Now, if we were talking about Joe Barry's too high safety style system, the Fangio style system, then I would be saying, hey, maybe go get a Alohi Gilman and go get a Jordan Fuller and probably at maybe that's 10 million of your dollars and then spend the 5 million elsewhere. If you've got 15 million to spend, I would probably be more leaning that way. I don't think one safety in that style system really makes all that much of a difference But in this new Jeff Hafley defense, I think it does a little bit more with needing that back end high single high safety. So I would be more leaning towards, once again, in this system, going more towards spending the money on a Xavier McKinney rather than a couple B+ players. All of that said, if they did decide to go a Julian Blackmon and a Jordan Fuller, like, I'm all in. I think those would be two really good signings. I wouldn't hate it. I think you can make a strong argument that those are two really good additions that would play really, really well together. But the last thing I'll say on this is I'm kind of a believer in this style system. If you're going to have two safeties, one single high, one box safety, I think you can find box safeties on the cheap. I don't think you need to spend on a box safety legitimately. Jaron Kearse is a player that's in this free agent class who is a box safety from the Dallas Cowboys. He's a fine player. I think he would fit totally fine, and you get him super cheap, and you would be very pleased overall with the results that you would get from him being a box safety without having to break the bank on anything. I would rather, I think, have something like that where you, or just like finding some guy in the draft, or there's so many different ways that you could go about it. But I think you can find the box safety relatively cheap. I think that post safety is so much harder to find, and Xavier McKinney hits it to a T, that I'd rather you get the big guy in the back, or like the important guy in the back, pay the money there, and then find that box safety in a variety of different ways. Heck, if you need it to be Anthony Johnson Jr., you could probably get away with that. But I want that post safety. So in every way I look at this, I would go the big money player, the Xavier McKinney, rather than two lesser players, B+, C-, whatever you want to call it. But I would be thrilled still if they did go out and get Jordan Fuller and a Julian Blackmon, or something in that ilk, Justin Simmons and Alohi Gilman. That's fine. That would be a huge upgrade, and I'm not going to, raise my nose in disgust at it in any way. That would be a really good offseason still for Green Bay. Newman, yeah, he's probably going to end up getting released, I would think, as well, for a variety of different reasons, but the cap is the big one. Let's get this happy hour going. Lining Kugel's canoe paddler for you. That's a great choice. Rudy Ford, I would probably just go in a different direction at this point too with Rudy. Again, if they want to bring him back on a cheap vet minimum deal where he has to earn his job in training camp, cool. That's awesome. I'm all for it. But remember, he basically moved behind everyone by the end of last year. He was behind Anthony Johnson Jr. He was behind Jonathan Owens, behind Darnell Savage. He kind of got way put to the back of the line. I don't think it's going to happen, but if you want to make him a primary special teams guy, whatever, that's totally cool. All right, Doug, happy hour, Andy. I'm drinking a Bell's Hazy Hearted Ale today. Sounds good, Doug. Happy hour to you as well. It's a lot of happies. I thought you were going to say you were drinking a Red Bull at first when I read this, but that would also be a good choice in my opinion. All right, Michael, so excited for free agency this year. I am right there with you. Doug, Andy, do you think there's any chance the Pack makes a big surprise signing, like a big name running back or like a Danielle Hunter? I was looking at this today, and I know you all probably hate when I do this, but right now I was actually just putting together content ideas. I got my notebook here. I got content ideas I was putting together. Right now, I have an episode slated to come out likely on Sunday, maybe tomorrow if I decide to change things up a little bit, but either tomorrow or Sunday, that is going to deal with some free agents that we haven't discussed, that nobody's even talked about. We've talked about safety. We've talked about linebackers, slot corners, running backs. We've talked about all those positions, and we've done it in depth here on the podcast. But I want to look at some players that Green Bay could sign that would be, either shocking or surprising, a position group we haven't even thought of. I thought of today, like, can you imagine, this will never in a million years happen, can you imagine if the Julius Peppers image like resurfaced this year, where like nobody thought of like Julius Peppers to the Packers at all, and then the Packers just tweeted a photo of Julius Peppers in Lambeau Field and said, "Hey, here's your newest Green Bay Packer," and he was on nobody's radar, nobody saw it coming. Imagine if like Chris Jones is just like reenacting the Julius Peppers photo, and Green Bay is like, "Hey, look, Chris Jones is a Packer. Happy Saturday," whatever it is. Like, it's not going to happen in a million years, not in any of the multiverses, period. But imagine something like that and how cool that would be. So I'm going to go over that, and I'm going to take a look and a deep dive into maybe some free agents that Green Bay could surprise with and maybe shock people with. Because I do think there's some. I was looking at it already. I do think there's a couple that'd be very interesting. Danielle Hunter is not on that list. I've talked about big name running backs. I don't think that's going to happen either. Antonio Gibson, as I mentioned, would be like a lower tier free agent signing. I think I almost said Aaron Gibson before, the former Wisconsin Badger, but Antonio Gibson. But yeah, there's some interesting ones out there. We'll get on that on the podcast one of these days coming up. To avoid drafting for need, how many safeties do they need prior to the draft? I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way. I think that Green Bay can go through the initial round of free agency and the draft and not address it the way that they would ideally like, meaning I'm sure they'd love to get a free agent, but maybe costs just get high. And I'm sure they'd love to address it via the draft, but maybe the players just don't fall that way, and get through that and still probably have free agents on the board that they can fill the roster with. Probably not ideal, but Goody is deserved the benefit of the doubt when it comes to filling out the roster in the right way. I think there's going to be guys like maybe a Jordan Poyer or maybe a Tashawn Gibson or who's the other one there's another one at safety too that I was thinking of. But like Tashawn Gibson's such a great example. Tashawn Gibson, if you need him to be your safety, is going to be fine. He's old. He's just old, but he's good. He's fine. San Francisco did well with him a season ago. He played a lot of single high safety. You would love to get younger. You would love to get better. But if you get through free agency in the draft and you didn't address it the way that you wanted, and Tashawn Gibson's still sitting out there, you can get by with that for a year. And it's not going to be game changing, but it's also not going to be life altering for the defense. It's not going to be like, well, we're screwed. Tashawn Gibson's back at safety. He'll be totally fine. He's a good player. I wouldn't hate that at all. So I don't necessarily know that they have to address it in free agency. We all get caught up in the fact of like now. There are ways to build this roster every single day of the year. They could get through, because what happens after the draft? After the draft, teams will fill up their rooms with new players, and now different players will get released. And we've seen teams are willing to release safeties. And the depth of that safety market is so large that I'm willing to bet you come mini camps and OTAs, maybe even early training camp, there will be good safeties on the market still. So even if they don't sign one prior to the start, I was actually thinking of this today too. Like, would you rather go out and maybe try to get one of those first 2 or 3 safeties off the market and pay big right now? Or would you kind of rather just wait and see how this safety class develops, knowing that you might be able to get a really, really good one in like a couple months, way cheaper? It's just an interesting way to think about it. And I'm more for like, hey, go get the better players now, but they're going to be able to find good safeties. I'm not worried about it. Even if they get through draft weekend and the position is still looking a little barren, Goody will upgrade it. They're not going to go into the season with Benny Sapp and St. Anderson and Anthony Johnson Jr. They'll find guys, they'll be better, and I think they can go about it in a variety of different ways. All that being said, I'd be surprised if they don't sign at least one pretty impressive safety before the start of the draft. I know we got a couple super chats in here. Tipping my glass in your general direction. Thanks for all you do. Over under on first free agent signing being a safety. I don't know if we can over under that, but we can put odds on it. I would put heavy odds that the first like outside free agent signing for Green Bay would be a safety. Could be an off-ball linebacker. Could be, again, maybe someone who surprises, but I would put the overwhelming odds that if you told me Green Bay signed a decently significant player next week, I'd be pretty surprised if it wasn't a safety. So appreciate the super chat, Michael, and the tip of the glass, but I will go with you. And I think the odds on favorite is a safety. Jonathan, what do you think of Anthony Johnson Jr. ceiling? Is he better positioned to succeed in Halfley's defense? I really, really liked Anthony Johnson Jr. coming out. I thought there was a really good chance that he was going to make himself into a starting safety by the end of his rookie season and his rookie campaign. You have to remember, in his rookie year, he could not beat out, we'll say Jonathan Owens. He couldn't beat out, Darnell Savage or Rudy Ford really either, but he couldn't beat out those safeties. One of the, lower tier safety groups in the NFL. He couldn't beat it out in his rookie season. I actually had him as my lowest graded safety of those 4. And I thought he had some learning moments, but I really did think there was upside here. Remember, he transitioned from corner to safety later in the draft, later in his college career, and, got drafted as a safety. I think he's just going to take some time to develop. He is an ideal, like 4th or 5th safety for you this year. Can play some special teams, can continue to develop, watch maybe some new free agent safeties play in this defense. But I'm still hopeful with, Anthony Johnson Jr. He just needs some time. He needs to learn. Hopefully he takes some sort of second-year jump and, learns that safety position and technique a little bit better. I think could play some single high safety. I think he could play a little in the box. I wouldn't, pigeonhole him into one specific spot, but I think there's still a lot of hope out there for Anthony Johnson Jr. that he can become something eventually, but it probably just going to take a little bit of time. And I don't know that you want to go into 2024 being like, well, hope we can get Anthony Johnson Jr. ready because he's going to need to play a lot. And that's why I think we all say, hey, it's time to get some safeties in the room and probably try something a little bit different to start the season at least. All right. Let's see. Where did I leave off? All right. All right. There's where we were. What positions do you think the Packers targeted in the draft and in the first and second round? Tough to say until we get through free agency to kind of see where, some of that stuff lies. But I think often, it's the same positions. Like they need, even if they sign players in free agency at safety, they need to start getting younger and more talented long-term at that spot. Off-ball linebacker, clearly still something that they can add youth and athleticism to. Devondre Campbell, likely, maybe, probably gone. And you're going to need some more bodies with going to a 4-3. And then offensive line, they need to start restocking the depth and competition at that spot as well. So O-line, and then of course, corner too. So O-line, corner, safety, off-ball linebacker. Those are your odds-on favorite for those first few rounds. All right. Savage and his agent looking at these safety cuts around the league like, yeah, no kidding. I saw like 2 years, 10 million for Savage. I, at this point, would be probably pretty surprised if he got anything in that range. Rick, thanks for listening. Any thoughts on Josh Jacobs? I would be all the way out on Josh Jacobs. Let's see if I have my notes here still on running backs. Josh Jacobs. Here was the big thing. So here was Josh Jacobs' numbers from a season ago, and I will be fully transparent, and we're just clear here. He had a bad quarterback situation, and things didn't exactly go according to plan. Josh McDaniels, as a head coach, he gets fired, so things were rough with the Raiders. So you can't necessarily hold this all against Josh Jacobs. His elusive rating per PFF, well, out of 35 eligible running backs, he ranked 35th. His 9 runs of 10 plus yards ranked 32nd out of 35 eligible running backs. He forced 28 missed tackles. That was 32nd out of 35 eligible running backs. And his 2.35 yards after contact per attempt ranked 35th out of 35th. Out of 35 eligible running backs last season that received, I think, half of their team's carries, there were 35 of them, and Josh Jacobs was 32nd or 35th in elusive rating, 32nd in carries of 10 plus yards, 32nd in missed tackles forced, and 35th in yards after contact per attempt. He showed significant signs of decline a season ago. I think there's too much wear and tear. And here's the thing. If he was like a 1 year, $7-8 million guy or something like that, and you want to try to take a 1 year flyer to team him with Aaron Jones, that's one thing. I think he's going to get paid a pretty decent amount of money. I think he might be one of the worst ROI guys in the league, probably signed in free agency this year, where you're going to give him a big contract at what's generally a non-premium position when Aaron Jones is going to get the primary carries and he's shown significant signs of decline. I would be all the way out on Josh Jacobs. All right. I like Emmanuel Wilson's upside, and I want a guy that can get a yard for a change. Yeah, I'm cool with Emmanuel Wilson. What I think you want is Aaron Jones, a really good backup that can be somebody that can still make plays. Please try again. Sorry, for some reason, Siri wanted to talk to me. That scared the crap out of me. But anyway, yeah, I think you ideally like Aaron Jones as your top free agent running back, and then a free agent to come in and be a playmaker to back him up. And then you've got Emmanuel Wilson and probably a couple rookies competing for like a number 3 and number 4 spot. I think that's your ideal situation, but Emmanuel Wilson should absolutely still be in the conversation to try to earn a 53-man roster spot. Salty Jordy, good to see you, my friend. Busy with my last semester of college, but glad I could make this one. Wouldn't the typical Packers move here being signing guys like Jordan Fuller and Jeff Okudah, Hafley style guys? I don't know that it necessarily has to be Hafley style guys, but the general Packer rule of thumb is, hey, let's go find value. That's let's put that aside for a second. That is a good rule of thumb to have. Guys, how many times do teams win free agency and totally suck? You do not win free agency by signing a good player to a huge contract more often than not. That is usually not how you win free agency. You win free agency by finding the diamonds in the rough. You win free agency by finding a player that is signed to a cheap Keyshawn Nixon. When you sign him to a 1 year vet minimum deal, no signing bonus, the least you could possibly pay him, and he ends up being an all-pro first-team kick returner that also helped out on defense a little bit, that is a win in free agency, right? Like those are the sort of wins that set you apart. Getting value in free agency is a good thing. And it doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. Green Bay Packers are a team who signed Reggie White, who signed Charles Woodson, who signed Zadarius Smith to a big contract, who signed Preston Smith. Ryan Pickett was not a big money free agent signing, but it was a really, really good free agent signing and helped them win a Super Bowl. They have a history of signing big time guys. And sometimes you hit on a Reggie White, and sometimes you hit on a Charles Woodson, and sometimes you miss on a Joe Johnson. And if you get one of those, elite all-time players, Julius Peppers was a very good free agent signing. You can hit on those players and be super successful. But a lot of times buying for value, and if you can actually do it and actually find it, is the best way to go. And a lot of times if you spend a ton of money on a free agent and they end up just being okay, it can really, really set you back. So I have no issue with Green Bay going the value way if they end up turning out the way that the team expects. Other times you can go and you can try to find value and sign an Adrian Clem, and he absolutely sucks. That's going to be a deep pull for some of you. It just depends. Like, it's operation go find good players. And sometimes you have to spend an exorbitant amount of money to get good players. And sometimes you can find a Jordan Fuller or a Cameron Curl or whomever it might be, and they end up being really, really solid and really, really sound and helping you out a ton. Heck, Rick Wagner, he was a very minimal free agent signing. He played really well for Green Bay that year in 2020 and had a very big role on that team. That is a winning free agent signing. They barely had any money to spend, but they found a legitimate starting offensive tackle for like nothing. That is a win. So it doesn't always have to be the big free agent signings, but there's a variety of ways to go over it. And you just got to find good players. Like I said, it's lame, it's cliche. Like, just find good players. I don't care how you find them, where you find them, how much you pay them. But usually winning free agency is finding those value adds. Hunter, I love you too. I love all of you guys. I'd prefer spending a late third or fourth draft pick on running back, can get one of the top guys, then grab another later. Yeah, I'm cool with the 2017 formula. Grab a guy in the fourth, Jamal Williams. Grab a guy in the fifth, Aaron Jones. Grab a guy in the seventh, Devontae Mays. And you know what? The fifth round guy might end up being the best, Aaron Jones. The fourth round guy might end up being really good, and maybe you let him go before you should and draft a second round pick at running back when you should have just kept the guy you drafted in the fourth round overall. But we'll talk about that maybe a different day. And then maybe the seventh round guy is a total bust. So be it. Maybe the seventh round guy is the guy that hits. Who cares? But go get a guy in the fourth, fifth, and seventh. Maybe you don't sign a free agent and it's Aaron Jones, 3 draft picks, and Emmanuel Wilson, with Jones being number 1 and the other 4 fighting out for 2 roster spots and the number 2, spot in the pecking order. I'm cool with that. There's different ways to go about it. And I think, following that 2017 formula might not be the worst case in the world. Really, what is your ideal combination of signings by position, and how much money can we allocate to sign each player? That's probably a little bit too much to just go over. Again, it comes down to value. I think probably that the safety room is the most barren. Safety is a position where you just can't go into the season the way that it's set up right now, and it's not a great draft class. And there's a ton of great free agent safeties out there, or at least really good ones. Safety to me is where you want to allocate the majority of your resources to begin with. I think offensive line depth is still important, but you could theoretically go the draft route there too. I do still think that finding an off-ball linebacker that would pair very well with Quay Walker would be valuable. And then, of course, filling out the cornerback position as well. But I think you can likely do that in the draft also. To me, it's safety, and it's safety 1A, and nothing else is really close. And then I'd start looking at off-ball linebacker a little bit after that. McKinney is a stud. I know Packers aren't usually aggressive when it comes to free agents, but I would like to see them get him with the talent at his age. Totally with you, Wesley. I agree. Like a trade, the team gets biggest name usually wins the trade. Yep, totally with you. In your opinion, what was the most impressive play from Jordan Love this year? The throw to Dontavian Wicks against Dallas. No question. The processing on that play, from getting out of the huddle, checking out of the play, getting the protections right, calling an audible that, I think was from earlier in the season that they hadn't even practiced that week, to then backpedaling, knowing that he's going to get hit on the play, throwing it through a defender's hands, and then putting the ball only where Dontavian Wicks could get it and throwing a perfect pass. Chef kiss. It was gorgeous, beautiful, and a play that will live in my mind for a very long time. Who was a draft prospect you thought was very good in the NFL but didn't pan out? There's a ton. There is a laundry list of guys that I thought were going to be great and turned out great. Guys that I thought were going to be great turned out busts. Guys that I thought were going to be busts turned out great. Guys that I thought were going to be busts turned out busts. There is a large matrix of every single one of those players. One of the ones that I talk about all the time. I really liked Stephon Anthony coming out of Clemson, first round pick linebacker. Saints really wanted Green Bay to go get him. You guys have heard me talk about too. Off-ball linebacker is still a position that I struggle with the most when it comes to evaluations. But man, I loved him coming out. So much athleticism, made so many plays at Clemson. But he was in a really good situation. He got to fly around a lot, didn't have to really take on blocks at all, and didn't really ever need to show off his instincts. They just kind of put him in positions to be successful. Got to the NFL, didn't have the instincts, didn't have the ability to take on blocks, flamed out of the league pretty quickly, and ended up being a total bust. So yeah, like that is one that I thought was going to be really good. This was younger. I didn't really do much scouting at the time, but man, I remember I really, really wanted the Packers, again, off-ball linebacker, to take Boss Bailey, like Champ Bailey's, was it cousin? I don't remember if it was brother or cousin. I want to say it was cousin, but I really wanted them to get Boss Bailey. I mean, he's got the perfect name. He's in linebacker. I think it was University of Georgia, if I remember correctly. Like it just fit perfect. And like Boss Bailey expected to go first round. Nobody had Nick Barnett on any mock drafts in the first round. And I'm thinking, and of course, Green Bay gets to pick, and I'm thinking Boss Bailey, Boss Bailey, Boss Bailey. And of course, they draft Nick Barnett. And I'm like, classic Packers. This is so stupid. Boss Bailey doesn't do anything. Nick Barnett becomes a great linebacker in the NFL, and the rest is history. So there are plenty of misses. My earliest one, when I was, I think, 7 years old, I was so mad when they traded for a guy named Brett Favre, and he was going to become the backup, when I was wholeheartedly believing that Ty Detmer was going to be the next great quarterback in Green Bay. Again, I was 7 years old, so forgive me, but I remember I was at the game, Kittrick Taylor touchdown from Brett Favre, and of course, Mikowski goes down, and I'm thinking Ty Detmer time, baby. And out comes Brett Favre, you idiot Packers, and seemed to turn out okay. So yeah, guess what? From time to time, guys, even at age 7, I got some stuff wrong. Rick, is it worth kicking the tires on Derrick Henry? Be really fun. I'm like, if you can get him on a 1 year, 2 year deal, that's, fine. Sure. Like what a tag team. But I think you probably end up in a situation where it's a little bit overkill. I don't know that you need all the playmakers that you already have on offense and then a Jones and a Derrick Henry. I'm not sure that you need to go to like the running back mercenary school and get a guy that's probably going to start hitting a decline pretty soon here. But hey, if we just want to have some fun, hell yeah, let's do it. But if you're looking at probably the best allocation of resources and how you want to spend money, probably not the best way to do that. But hey, sometimes fun is good too. And a Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry 1-2 combo would be very, very fun. Let's see what this says. Packers Instagram is up there with Facebook for most delusional. I saw someone say today that you can't get a better receiver than Lazard for a 5th round pick. Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting take. All right, if you were the Packers GM, who are you taking with the 25th pick? Gold Assassin 02. I will look you in the eye right now and say, I don't know yet. I will get there. I'm going through a lot of draft prospects right now. Spent a ton of time on it this week. But we got a lot of time left to sort of lock in our picks. But some guys I'm excited about, some guys I want to watch a lot more of, and I'm not going to lock anyone in quite yet. What is the significance of today, and can we expect any roster moves or movies in the next few hours? Don't think we're going to get any roster movies, but don't think we're going to necessarily, if we didn't hear anything by now, the transactions for today have already come out. We could get a report. We could get a report from a Silverstein or a Domovsky or something that the Packers are going to do something. Hey, the Bears signed Tavarius Moore. I was just thinking about Tavarius Moore the other day of like, man, nothing came of him. He didn't sign with the team the entirety of the season after Green Bay released him in camp. But it looks like the Bears just signed Tavarius Moore, but no significance for today, period. Other than it's Friday and it's happy hour, but nothing that Green Bay needs to get done today. And all transactions were already made for the NFL Wire. So there's not going to be any official transactions. And my guess is we're probably not going to get any reports for the remainder of the day. Why waste draft capital on the wide receiver room that has 8 competent wide receivers to cut guys that are competent? Because this is still a game, and I'm not saying they should per se here, Omer, but this is a game about playmakers and stars. And as soon as you get complacent with a position and be like, oh, we don't need those. And then all of a sudden, look at last year. Christian Watson hurt for a period of time. Romeo Doubs missed time. Dontavian Wicks missed time. Jaden Reed missed time. All 4 of your top receivers missed time last year. And here's the other thing that I will say. We can look at it and say they have 8 competent wide receivers. I will say 5, maybe 6, if you want to put Malik Heath in that conversation as well. Samori Toure and I'm assuming you're putting Grant Dubose is that 8th one. Let me put it this way. You are not making any roster decisions, period, end of story, based on Malik Heath, Samori Toure, or Grant Dubose. You're not going to be like, well, we can't acquire someone because we don't want to, have to put Samori Toure and, Grant Dubose down a spot. That wouldn't even factor into the decision-making. And as soon as you sort of get complacent with something, all of a sudden 2 guys go out for the year with injuries. And now you're like, man, we could really use a wide receiver. Draft talent. You don't know what's going to happen next. And maybe you get into camp and maybe Malik Heath takes a step and looks like an absolute stud. And Bo Melton looks like a number 1 wide receiver. And the guy that you selected in the 2nd round looks like a stud wide receiver. And you're like, oh my God, we have like 7 number 1 wide receivers. 1, great problem to have. 2, it doesn't mean that you can't take the 7th best one of those and shop them around the league and maybe trade them for a team that has too many corners, linebackers, safeties, whatever it might be. You can still make roster moves after that. Don't sacrifice getting a really good player just because it doesn't necessarily fit a position of need. Imagine if, let's see if we can take a look at last year's draft, 2023 NFL draft. Because I think we can probably find something that makes a little sense here. All right. Where do we go? Let's say, I'm trying to think of a good example here. All right, let's use it this way, right? The Jacksonville Jaguars selected Brenton Strange in the 2nd round. I can tell you wholeheartedly, I've not gone and watched a bunch of Brenton Strange tape. Let's see what his PFF grades were. By player, Brenton Strange. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Got to get out of here in 8 minutes, by the way, guys. Remind me if I forget. Brenton Strange last year played 307 snaps with a 48.6 grade. All right. So let's say Green Bay was in the position last year and they had enough wide receivers. And they say, you know what? We don't need any more wide receivers. Okay. So they say, we're not going to draft, even though Jaden Reed is the best player on our board, we're not going to draft him because we have a lot of really good wide receivers already. Clearly, they were not in that position last year, but let's say they were. Let's say they had the 7 wide receivers that they had now are the same caliber. And they say, we're not going to draft because we don't have a need. And they draft Brenton Strange instead, who's the next player on their board who maybe would fit a position of need a little bit better. So they pass on Jaden Reed because they don't need a wide receiver. And then they draft a Brenton Strange instead. You just passed on a super talented wide receiver for a worse player because you didn't think you had a need at the time. And you can address other needs later. That's why you don't want to go into the draft feeling like, well, we can't pick this player. We need a certain player. Go draft the best player available, because I don't care who you are and what your roster looks like. Give me Jaden Reed on my roster rather than Brenton Strange. Don't let a position group necessarily lead you to guys like 7 of the 10 or 11 draft picks that they picked this year are going to end up being like busts and never amount to anything. And I know that the last draft class is, there's always exceptions to the rule, but far more often than not, like 7 of the 11 are just going to amount to nothing, or they're going to end up on another team, whatever it might be. You just need to get good players, and you're hoping to hit on them regardless of what positions they will be, and you figure out the rest and how to fill out the rest of your roster later. So I don't necessarily see it that same way. Jaden Hicks, Ross Uglum had a phenomenal daily draft on him today, so you can go check that out right here on the Pack a Day Podcast YouTube channel. Let's see. Goodbye, Newman and Seinfeld voice. I love that. All right. What else? Here's a good one. All right, Andy, I see the Packers are projected to draft an offensive tackle in the 1st round. Don't they typically find offensive linemen in later rounds? Yeah, they do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it that way, or that you should always do it that way, or that you couldn't find a super talented offensive lineman in round 1. Again, this is all about finding good, talented football players. There have been plenty of super talented offensive linemen that have been drafted in round 1 through the years. Green Bay has done a great job of finding Zach Tom in round 5, Rasheed Walker in round 7, John Runyon Jr. to an extent in round 6, Elton Jenkins even in round 2. You can make a strong argument of like, hey, Green Bay doesn't really need to draft offensive linemen in the 1st round. And in fact, when they have through the years, Derek Sherrod, John Michaels, Ross Verba was fine. Hasn't gone necessarily great. Bakhtiari, 4th round pick. Josh Sitton, 5th round pick, I want to say. TJ Lang, 4th round pick. Mike Wall, supplemental draft pick. Marco Rivera was not an early draft pick. Scott Wells was not an early draft pick. JC Treader, 6th. I think 5th or 6th. I think Corey Lindsley was a 6th. Brian Bulaga was the first, though. Hey, we found one. Brian Bulaga was a first round pick. You don't just pass on one because you think you can get him later. If you can find a Brian Bulaga in the first round, hey, go find your next Brian Bulaga. If you think you can get your next Zach Tom in the fifth round, hell, go get your next Zach Tom in the fifth round. But go get good players. Same thing. There's probably the easiest way to sum it up. There's no perfect formula in the draft. Just because it happened in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen again. You just have to go out and find the best players available and use the resources that you have to go and try to acquire those players. And you let the chips fall how they fall. And sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it's not. But I give Goody the benefit of the doubt, especially after last year's draft. They're doing a pretty great job right now. Which Packers free agents cut candidates do you think end up on the Jets next year? Do any make sense? Yash Nyman could make sense. Bakhtiari could make sense. John Runyon Jr. could make sense. They need offensive linemen. So all of those would be possibilities. I don't think there's a ton, though, ultimately. Probably the offensive lineman would be probably if like Rodgers really liked any of them, that could be within the realm of possibility. So I'd probably go some of the offensive line guys. All right, Andrew, good to see you, buddy. Pick a free agent group. Xavier McKinney, 1, Zach Moss, 2, Willie Gay Jr., Micah Hyde. Wait. Oh, okay. 1 is Xavier McKinney, 2 is Zach Moss, Willie Gay, and Micah Hyde. 3 is Dobbins, Frankie Louvu, and Geno Stone. I will take number 1. I will take Xavier McKinney. I'm not a big Zach Moss guy, although he'd be a fine number 2. Willie Gay, I think there'd be too much inconsistency teaming with Quay Walker at the inside linebacker spot or off-ball linebacker spot. And I'm not really super high in a Micah Hyde reunion. I'm not a J.K. Dobbins guy. I would love Frankie Louvu. I don't think Geno Stone fits in Hafley's defense. So I will go Xavier McKinney, number 1 for that. I might have missed Prince's earlier question, but or Savage return could be early move if it is going to happen. I hope not, Prince. I am very, very ready to go in a different direction. Sorry, Preston. I totally missed your super chat. My apologies for that. Do you think it would be disappointing if Green Bay did their classic, we were in the discussions for X player and signed bargain bin players? Not necessarily. They could be in the discussion for Xavier McKinney, and Xavier McKinney could get a 4-year or 5-year, $100 million deal. I'd be like, oh my goodness, thank goodness they didn't go in that direction. That's too much. They could be in the discussion for Xavier McKinney and he goes to another team and they could end up with a really great contract for a player like Julian Blackmon or a really great contract for Jordan Fuller. And I'd be like, that's a great contract. That's a great deal. I'm excited about that player. I know that a lot of what I'm saying today is saying like, there's different ways of going about doing things. I think it's just really important to have an open mind and know that there have been, guys, a lot of times free agent signings that we've wanted to happen in the past that would not have ended up well if Green Bay did go in that direction. There have been other players where, Goody deserves a lot of credit for finding guys like a Rasul Douglas and Devondre Campbell for that first year of the deal where he got him on a minimum deal, and a Rick Wagner. And some of those guys turned out really, really well as well. Finding guys like a Bo Melton on the practice squad, Alan Lazard previously on the practice squad. There's more ways to go about this. And more often than not, it's about finding the right value for the right players. That's from a draft standpoint, a free agency standpoint. And again, there's no perfect calculus here. Sometimes you might find a Charles Woodson, Julius Peppers, a Reggie White, and Santana Dotson, a Sean Jones, whoever it might be. And you go spend money and you go get that player and it can work out really, really great. There are other times where you go and spend, like I said earlier, a ton of money on a Joe Johnson and it works out horrendously. There are times where you go and you get a value free agent signing like a Rick Wagner and it's amazing. There's times where you go get a value free agent signing like a Marquand Manuel or an Adrian Clem or a Byron Bell, and it's an unmitigated disaster. There's no perfect calculus. Sometimes stuff's going to work, sometimes it's not. And you just hope they get the right guys at the right price and things go in the right direction and continue to trend in the way that they are trending right now. All right, I might have time for one more question. Let's see. Prince Dubose rises up the depth chart, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe that's a tough depth chart to crack, though, big time. All right, we'll end with a Josh Jackson question of all things. Oh, yeah, Brian, really good point. Landon Collins comes to mind. Like everyone wanted Landon Collins. That would have been a nightmare contract. Let's see if I can find that Josh Jackson one again. All right, interesting thought. Why do you think Josh Jackson didn't pan out in the NFL? He had elite tape at Iowa. Were you high on him? I did like Josh Jackson in that draft. There are a variety of different things. Josh Jackson had flaws in his game from day one. There's no question about it. What he did at Iowa was he was a off-ball zone coverage playmaking corner. He was not a sticky coverage guy when it came to man coverage. He was a strictly outside zone corner, and he needed his eyes on the quarterback. He didn't, if I remember correctly, I don't think he tested like through the roof. Now I really want to look. See if I can find it really quick here. I think he tested well enough. I'm sure he's still a high RAS guy. I don't think he had like a crazy high, like 40 time or anything like that. Okay. He was a 926 RAS, but 4.56 40. That's what I was remembering. A 4.56 40, which is like a 45th percentile. He's still at a very high RAS overall, but his 40 was not that strong. Here's the bigger thing with Josh Jackson. They needed to develop him, and they needed to put him in a position for him to get success and confidence early. He's an off-ball zone corner, and he starts off having to play in the slot in man-to-man coverage, and he was screwed from day one. He was just screwed. He never got a comfortability. He never got to do what he did best. He finally gets some time on the outside, and he's really, really grabby. The foot speed doesn't really transfer over, and I just think he never quite got his confidence under him. And I think I'm a huge believer in players that like you need to get off to a strong start. You need to get some confidence and you need to kind of get them trending in the right direction. Josh Jackson never got that. And there's a good chance that even if he got that, he just fails anyway. And it probably just wasn't going to work out. But I think if you start him off in a situation where he can play off-ball zone corner, probably on the, far side of the field where quarterbacks have to throw a little bit longer, and you can get him to jump some of those balls and be a playmaker, I think he has an opportunity for success. He was in a very brutal position for his skill set, and he just had to kind of hang with it, and he couldn't, and his career was just over before you knew it. Sucked. I really liked him coming out, but I didn't think they put him in a great position to succeed, and just never really panned out. So that's how I would go about the Josh Jackson conversation. All right, friends, I have got to get out of here. Got to get my son to soccer practice. So I'm going to go do that. Make sure to subscribe, like, comments, become a Pack-A-Day Podcast YouTube member. There are so many great options for you out there. If you haven't done it yet, it is by far and away worth it. There are already future episodes. The Saturday and Sunday daily draft episodes are out there. If you're a Pack-A-Day Podcast member, you can view those right now. Episodes come out early. A members only Q&A. So if your question didn't get answered today, I answer every single member's Q&A so far. I've gotten to every single question in the chat. They're usually an hour right around that time, and I get to everyone's questions. So that's amazing. Extra episodes every week. There's a ton to look forward to. So check out the Pack-A-Day Podcast YouTube memberships. Again, subscribe, hit that like button so other people who weren't able to get here can see it in their algorithm. But I appreciate you guys a ton. You're the best. Enjoy your weekend. Free agency next week. Going to be a ton of fun. Might have to do some impromptu emergency live episodes. So keep an eye out for those. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.